June 12, 1985, and we're at the apartment of Fern Conkrite, who lives at the Senior Citizen Housing Complex in Portland, 1800 Loyan Boulevard. On March 3rd, 1985, Fern celebrated her 90th birthday. Today she is going to visit with us about reminiscences of her life and tell us some of the things that she remembers. Fern, good morning.
Good morning.
What are we going to talk about first?
Well, do you want me to go on with this now?
Sure.
All right. I'm talking about the Sebewa corners that I knew from about 1900 to 1934. There were about 35 houses that sheltered some 90 people, more or less. In a 1876 atlas, Sebewa was a village divided by the town line. The part in Danby was known as Cornell, named from a family of early settlers. John Bradley was our first postmaster. He also had a grocery store. F.N. Cornell had a general store.
Fern, just for our viewers, there may be some people around here who do not know where Sebewa Corners is located. Could you tell us?
Well, it's 8 miles from Portland. You go out on Clarksville Road to Kiefer Highway. Then you go about 5 miles south. There isn't much left there anymore, but that's where it is.
Are there any of the old buildings there that you remembered when you grew up there as a child?
Yeah.
What's still there?
Well,
What is that big building
on the corner?
Yes.
That was the Oddfellow and Rebecca Hall. But that's about all there is. There's a little building just west that Dr. Morse had for his office. And that's still there. And the house next to it was still there. The other one next to it burned. That's where my folks went to housekeeping. And the house that I lived in is still there, and the one next to it. But a lot of the others are gone.
Can you describe for us, you've mentioned F.N. Cornell had a general store. Could you describe that store for us, what sort of merchandise he had?
Well, he had, general groceries, and he had dry goods, he had notions. For instance, I can remember when I was a little wee girl at Christmas time, he had a little white lamb, and a little girl stood by it. I got it yet. And it was Mary and the little lamb. And I just coaxed my folks and kept at it until my dad paid $a quarter for that Mary and her little lamb and brought it home to me for Christmas. And at Thanksgiving time, I don't know where they come from, but he usually had upstairs over the store, he'd have a whole truckload, what we'd call a truckload now, but then it wasn't a truckload because the horses had to go. There was a wagon load, and of turkeys. And I can remember going with my mother and picking the pin feathers off those turkeys, getting them ready to go to Grand Rapids. And they would load them up at night and drive all night, and they'd be in Grand Rapids in the morning.
It's very, very interesting. Okay, let's go on.
Will Alberts had a hardware and a blacksmith shop, and he was a blacksmith. And this Will Alberts is Marjorie's father. You remember Marge Gilden?
Yes.
And sometimes we had a meat market. Now, I'll have to tell you about that. There was a store right side of Bradley's little store, and they'd go out in the country and they'd kill a cow, They'd bring it in and fill up the the refrigerator with homemade ice, and they'd sell out that cow, and then they'd go out and find another one somewhere and bring them in and sell them.
Do you remember where the ice was cut?
No, well, it was cut on down out on the, I think on the mill pond that was west of the corners. I think that's where it was cut. And I don't know where they put it. I don't know where the ice house was. And we had two churches, the Methodist and the United Brethren. The land was given by John Friend in 1876 for the Methodist Church, and the Dan Holliday family gave the land for the United Brethren Church in 1892. And the United Brethren people had a campground west of the corners for a long, long time.
All right, now that campground still exists.
It's still there, but now what they use it for, I don't know. Do you?
It's called the Bible Missionary Church.
I thought that they was some kind of a college there. Or it's just they still have camp meeting there, I guess.
Did you as a child attend the camp meetings?
Oh yes, I can remember on Sunday night, the last Sunday night of the camp meeting, everybody that was there, they had a tabernacle. First they had tents, a great big tent. Then they built a tabernacle. And on the last Sunday night, everybody that was there went outside of the tabernacle, and everybody joined hands, and they sang songs and had prayer and so on. And then everybody shook hands with everybody else. We had two gristmills. John Fern built the first one, west of the corners on Sebewa Creek, with a dam and a mill pond. The Lau brothers later owned the mill. I don't think that John Friend ever run the mill at all. I think the Lau brothers probably did it all. And they were followed by Grant Carbaugh. And the Weipert family had one north of Sebewa with a mill pond and a dam. And now as you drive along on Kiefer Highway, you look off to that way and you can see the remains of the dam. And part of the mill, or the gristmills there too.
Now, were both of these gristmills, was the power used for anything other than grinding?
No, no.
Okay.
The Weiperts had sold theirs to the Benedict family, and later Harry Gibson owned and operated the mill for a number of years. Sebewa High School, District Number 1 Fractional, was our center of learning. The school was named for the people that gave the land. The Halliday School is named for the same family that gave the land and the church and the school. In the early days, we had a rooming house and a hotel, believe it or not.
Let's talk about your school a little bit.
All right.
Did you start when you were 5, or how old were you?
I was 6.
You were 6.
I was 6.
And how far did you live from the school?
Well, about a little better than a half a mile.
And this was a one-room primary district?
Yeah, yeah.
Can you describe for us some of your early recollections of going to school and what the school looked like? And
Well, I come to that later.
oh, all right.
In the early 1900s, we had a daily mail delivery to Sunfield. And later, that delivery was extended to Portland for a time. I can't remember how long. The first mailman I remember was Raul Derby, who carried both Sunfield and to Portland. Others that carried to Sunfield were Liddy Puffer, Minnie Southwell, and Jessie Friend, who only carried, as I said, to Sunfield. After the Sebewa office was closed, RFD came in. And Lawrence Knapp was our mail carrier for a long time, like 25 years or more. We carried by horse and buggy in summertime and team and sleighs in the winter. He would drive one horse to Sunfield in the morning, then he'd change horses, deliver the mail back till noon and be at the farm for dinner. And then he'd change horses again and finish the route And then when he got back to Sunfield, he changed to the first one in the morning and come home. That was the summer schedule. Wintertime with the horses on a sleigh, the team had to go farther, as each team made about 20 miles. And he would go to Sunfield in the morning, then that team would have to come back, go around that route, and come back to the farm at noon. Then they were changed for another team. Of course, these were all the same horses, but they made teams, you see. And then that team went on east around by the Danby Cemetery and up to Tupper Lake Road now, and on into Sunfield. And then they'd have to come back at night.
Then in the wintertime, it was very difficult because at that time there were no large plows or road cleaning equipment.
Lots
as
of
we
times
know.
that team made its own road, and that's the reason that they had to change them so often.
Mhm.
Later, a Model T Ford did the trick, and then he had a Model A, and then as time went on, he had a car to fit the times. And we had a flourishing IOF, our Oddfellow, and Rebecca Lodge, with about 100 members in each one. I went through the chairs to the PAHS Noble Grands, to District Deputy President, also President of the County Noble Grands, and played for the degree team. And we had a snap team, let me tell you. Then, you want to say anything about that?
Oh, of course.
All right.
Now, this lodge work that you're doing, was this being done out at Sebewa Corners, or were you coming into Portland?
Oh,
this
no,
time?
no, that was the big hall there on the corner was our Oddfellow and Rebecca Hall. And of course, they always had to have the lodges upstairs. But we had a good team, and we had a good lodge.
Did you possibly travel to other cities
Oh,
and villages
yes.
to do your
Oh, yeah.
drill work?
We did a lot of work over in the Mulligan after they started the lodge over there. We did a lot there. We went to Sunfield. We came down here to Portland.
And that was something that you enjoyed a great deal at that time.
Well, sure. I thought I was quite smart. Some of the clerks in the Bradley and Cornell stores were Harley Rogers, Tracy Williams, Rhoda Dietzman, and Reba Snyder. Then Lillian Allman was the bookkeeper in the Cornell store, and Leighton DeGraw, Alva Dietzman, Orson Drake, to name a few clerks in the Cornell store. Wilmer Baker was a barn builder. Every year he had a crew of men working. Several barns are still standing that were Baker built. The one out on the Gibbs farm is one of them.
Out on the Lloyd Gibbs farm?
Yep, yeah, Lloyd Gibbs, that big barn on
Yes.
the Lloyd Gibbs farm. And the one east of Sebewa on the, it would be the Floyd Erdman farm now. I don't know who lives there, but some of the family does. That barn. And I couldn't tell you how many more, but he went all over the country and built barns.
What's the builder's name again?
Wilmer Baker.
Wilmer Baker.
Mhm. Now here's my school days. When I first went to school, we carried water from across the road. And then we got a well and a pump. And we used to keep warm with a round oak stove in the middle of the room. At least there was a fire in the stove. One teacher had as many as 30, 40 pupils. They had good control and discipline. My teachers were Agnes Erdman, Bruce Gibbs, Emerson Ray, Grace Kenyon, Dorothy Semaine and Maud Semaine, Anna Wilton, and Elizabeth Cornell. Anna Wilton, her father had he built suits. What is it?
A tailor?
Tailor. He was a tailor.
Let's go back here. Maud Semaine.
Yeah.
Who did she marry?
Leon Lockwood.
Yes.
And Dorothy Semaine married, she would deck, you remember, and she married Fred Berkeley. In World War I, we sent several boys to service. Walter Brown, Arthur Lau, Floyd Erdman, Ivan McCormick, Clyde Heyer, and Don Ben's scooter, and he's the only survivor of the bunch. He and Winnie sent 2 boys, Junior Norton, to World War II, and Norton was in the Battle of the Bulge, and Jim went in the Army of Occupation, and he found his wife over there and brought her back.
Now, we're talking about World War I.
Yeah. Oh, that was Don's war.
Don Ben Scooter.
Yeah. That's World War I.
All right.
Yeah. Go on.
Mhm.
Our doctors were Dr. Albro, who later moved to Portland, and he has a street name for him down here, you know, over
Yes.
on the west side. Dr. Snyder was next and was with us for a long time. Later went to Mulligan. I'll have to tell you about Dr. Snyder. When I was about 2 years old, my folks moved from Danby back to Sebewa, and they lost me one day. But my mother always had a pink sunbonnet on me. So my dad went to hunt, and he went up from where we lived down here up to the Four Corners, and he saw that pink sunbonnet going down the road. Well, he caught up with me down there. I got down, probably about where Bailey's lived, somewhere in there. And he asked me where I was going, and I said, well, I'm going to see Dr. Snyder. Well, he said, Dr. Snyder, you got clear by there, so I guess you better come back. So he picked me up and carried me back home. And then Dr. Morse came next, and he went on to Lake Odessa. Dr. Crawford was our last one, and he went to Sunfield. And by that time, automobiles were in, so the house calls could be made much easier than with a horse and buggy.
As you're relating this, Fern, I'm getting the feeling that at this time, Sebewa was really quite an important
Well, it was, yeah. We had,
center in this area.
yeah, it was. It was a nice little town. A little village. It wasn't a town, but it was a village. And it was all right. And twice I can remember the post office being robbed. Not much was taken, but the safe was blown open. The last time, a horse and buggy was taken. And the next morning, it was found tied to the fence down on the town line. That's Kiefer Highway now. All the residents were home in time for breakfast. And in other words, it was home talent. And another time, the Bradley had taken in several cords of wood on store debts. The wood piles began to get smaller. So said merchant did a little detective work by putting a pinch of gunpowder in several blocks of wood. In a few days, a guy's stove blowed the door off. No more wood was missing. I won't mention any names because it's pretty close. On July 4th, 1914, some boys made a cannon and packed it with gunpowder and sand. Then they had a wick in there, and then they lit the wick in front of Canal Store. It exploded, and a fragment went through the window, striking a 6-year-old boy. He was severely wounded, and he died just a few hours later. Probably lived 10, 12 hours. On September 18th, 1921, the DAR Society of Ionia erected a boulder about a half-mile south of Sebewa to the memory of Jonathan Ingalls, who was born near that spot in 1762. Frances Ingalls Spaulding of Crystal was a granddaughter of Jonathan's. Hall Ingalls was a brother of Frances and also a grandson.
Jonathan wasn't born there.
They were
He moved there from the east.
they were both born down on Shinmikon.
Jonathan was born out east and moved here. His family was born then.
Later, Hall married Nellie Braden, and her father, Milton, was the first sexton of the Portland Cemetery. Hall and Nellie lived most of their married life of some 60 years about a half mile north of Sebewa. And Hall and Francis, they always called her Frankie, was present at that boulder when they unveiled the boulder.
Let's go back a little bit for another. Some people who are watching this telecast who probably don't know about Jonathan Engel. Could you tell us who was Jonathan Engel?
Well, he was just Jonathan Ingalls as far as I know. And I think that now I'm not too sure, but I think that he possibly was an older brother of Bujidi.
A what?
Bujidi.
All right, what's a bujidi?
Bujidi was Charlie Ingalls.
He was Charlie's father.
And young Charlie Ingalls, his father. Yeah, there was a young Charlie Ingalls, and the second Charlie Ingalls was Lula Kelly's and Marion Stifler's father. They were Ingalls girls.
But Hall Ingalls was a Revolutionary War soldier.
Yeah,
Oh, then this is the reason why the stone is there, because he was a Revolutionary War soldier.
yeah,
He
later
was born?
in 1762.
That's,
The Conkrite family came from New York in a covered wagon to Danby Township and settled near the Center Line Bridge. My father was the second youngest of 11 children. They were all born in Danby in a little hut just south of the bridge, except the baby of 6 months who came with them. One of the first burials in Danby Cemetery in 1831 was a 4-year-old girl who was burned in a bonfire while they were clearing the land. My father played with the Indians, and he got so he could talk pretty good Indian too when he was a kid. The Wainwright family came from New York by the way of Indiana. They were in Indiana about 2 years. My mother was the eldest of 4 children, and she used to make dresses for the squaws down on Chimneycon.
do you yourself personally remember anything about meeting or seeing Indians as a child?
No. They'd gone before I got on Earth. Raymond Kramer, who lives in Portland, can boast of being born in Sebewa's only log house in 1910. Going from her home to a neighbor's house because she was afraid of thunder and lightning, Maud Fowle was struck by lightning and killed in the spring of 1908.
Was she a neighbor
Yeah.
of yours?
Yep, I saw it when it happened. I saw her when she fell. Boy, that was a streak of lightning, and it thundered at the same time, and we saw her when she fell. A guy got sweet on a gal, and he'd go over to see her early in the morning and stay all day. Mother said, enough is enough. So one day she went after him with a buggy whip. He came home just ahead of her. Oh, I can see that too. No, he didn't marry the girl, but he did go back to see her. A family wanted to go back home to Indiana, so they rigged up 2 covered wagons. They loaded up the household goods and took off. Ma and the 2 children in one wagon and Dad in the other. After a time came back word that they had made it okay. During the smallpox epidemic, one of the victims was a baby about a year old, and she carried the scars, or the pits as they are called, to her grave some 80 years later.
Let's see now, the smallpox epidemic, the big one, was in 1918, am I right on that?
Oh no, that
When
was
was
way
that?
back in 1892 or 3, about 93. The one death was Albert Bradley. His sister was staying at the Oliver Benscooter home. She was looking out of the upstairs window and saw her father and another man when they came with lanterns to the cemetery to bury Albert. They always buried at night, you know,
Yes.
when they had a contagious disease. Some of the early families in Sebewa were the Jim Browns, the Charlie Hollidays, the Fred Erdman. Oh heavens, go and answer that. John Friend, Henry Allman, Peter Knapp, and Lon Evans, the Alfred Garlards, Slate families, the Lows, the Conkrites, the Highs, the Kramers, the Overleys, and the Holmeses.
Now, many of those names and many of those families still reside in this area, do they not? Let's take a look at some of these.
Well,
names.
Jim Brown's. Now, Jim Brown was the father, was the great-grandfather of this Brown boy that's just got killed. And Charlie Holiday lived just south of the church. And Fred Erdman lived in the house next to us.
Now, the Holiday School is named after this family?
Yeah, Dan Holiday gave the land for the school, and he and Charlie, I think, were cousins. I think so. At least Charlie Holiday, as I remember back, was the first one in the Holiday family that married out of the family. They married into the family all those years. And then Fred Erdman.
Now, there's a road named after this family, after
Yeah,
the Erdman
yeah.
family.
Yeah, and they was Fred and Frank and Rose Brown was belonged to this family of Browns. Well, Rose Brown was an Erdman, and she was the great-grandmother of that place just got killed.
Oh, of the, yes.
Mm-hmm. And John Friend, he
No.
lived on.
Would this be the, many of us know Dayton Friend. Would Dayton Friend
No,
be from that
no,
family?
no, John Friend. You remember Lucy, lived out west of town. Evelyn Friend, she lived out west on the old Portland Road. She was a granddaughter. And Lawrence Friend, and Lucille Merrills is a granddaughter. Then Henry Allman, all of the Allman boys belonged to him. And their farm was east of the Halliday Schoolhouse. But Oscar, and he was John's father. And then there was Henry, another Henry, and well, there's three Henry Allmans. As they went on down in generations, there was a Henry Allman, and Oscar, and Jay, and Lillian. And then Peter Knapp was Lawrence's father. Lon Evans, they never had any children. Alfred Garlards never had any children. And he was our
Butcher.
he was our justice of peace, and he used to hold court. The Slate families, some of them, once in a while, some of those girls come to see me now. And the Lows, they're all gone. Well, no, not all of them, because that Dick Lau and his family that lives in Charlotte is, I guess, Charlotte or Lansing, I don't know which, belongs to this family. And I'm the only one left that holds the Conkrite name.
Fern, what year did the Conkrites move into this area? From New York, you said, did you
Yeah,
not?
well, and you see, in 1931, that little girl was, well, it was before 1931.
1831.
1831, yeah. And it was before that. It must have been in the late 20s. Sometime, I don't know for sure. I'm not sure.
You're not sure of when the Conkrite family moved into this
No,
area?
no. I know it was before that, 1831, because that's when the little girl got. And she was, there was probably 3 or 4 older than her. So you see, they'd been there a while. And the Highs, and Harry High was one of the Highs. Raymond Kramer.
Harry Hyde the baker.
Yep, yeah, him and Iva. And Raymond Kramer is a descendant. And the Overleys, I think there's a family of Overleys in Lake Odessa. I'm not sure. I see their name once in a while. And the Holmeses are all gone as far as I know. And one of the first preachers in the Methodist church played a violin. And he brought this violin to church. That was a big no-no, as violins were only used in dance halls. And the devil was in it bigger than a woodchuck. Another one of our first preachers was T.J. Spencer. Mrs. Spencer died, leaving a son, Edward. Mrs. Robinson was a widow, and with a daughter named Fanny. Reverend Spencer and Mrs. Robinson married, and in a few years, Edward and Fanny married. And they had a son named James, but he's Bud to all of us. Some of our other pastors were Birch, and he drove a horse and cart and wore a linen duster. And Wynn, preacher Wynn, Ellinger, Swam, Stanley, who came from England, and all that's a big story, because them poor folks didn't know straight up. They didn't know one thing from another, and they had to learn all the Yankee language, you know. Thompson and Carter. I might say that during my growing up years, I was organist for the Sunday school and then for church. I taught a Sunday school class, president of the Missionary Society, leader of the Little Light Bearers, that's a branch of the society, and always helped to Children's Day. After coming to Portland, I was pianist at the Nazarene Church for a time, 2 different times. My school days ended with the 8th grade at Sebewa High. Then I went on to work. In the early 20s, I went into the baby business. Babies were born at home then. My first baby was Lucille Singlinger, and later Mildred came along, then Catherine Kenyon, Arlene Sears, the 2 Greeno boys at Crystal, and the 2 Ben Scooter boys, Junior Norton, and Glenn Fender, just to name a few. The Greeno boys are about 3 times removed as great-grandsons of Jonathan Ingalls.
When you were helping with these mothers and babies, were you a midwife?
Yep.
You actually helped deliver babies?
Well, no, the doctor was always there to do the delivering, but I washed and dressed them.
You did?
Yep. And then I did all the work, the washing and everything, and took care of the babies and the mother.
And you stayed until the mother was able to be up and
Yeah.
around again?
Yeah, and at that time, you know, the mothers were in bed for a week. They weren't
Yes.
allowed out. They were their feet even on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
In 1927, I came to Portland when Gertrude Fischel and I went into the interior decorating. One year we hung up 1,000 rolls of wallpaper and spread several gallons of paint. Later, we bought an acreage on Oklamas Road, and we did a little farming with cows and chickens. I-96 put an end to that business. Then we built us a house on Riverside Drive. In 78, we came to Portland Apartments. In 84, Gertrude passed away at the Ionia Manor after 58 years together. Sebewa is a trailer village now, only a few houses left. I am the oldest living native, and I have seen the times change from wood stoves, hard coal burners, furnaces to solar heat, and have gone from horse and buggies to automobiles to airplanes, radios, television, a man on the moon, and I've done all of that in 90 years.
What a wonderful, wonderful life you've lived, Fern, and a very busy life.
And I'm still doing it.
Yes, you are. For those of you who are viewing, Fern,
Geez, wants you to talk.
Fern continues to make mittens for our clothing bank at the food center for children who need
That's
mittens,
all right, ma'am.
caps, and so on.
Just leave it. I'll put it.
Put her on your knee, on her knee?
No,
Oh,
I'm gonna just ask her.
Oh, Fern,
yeah,
tell us the story of this box.
all right. That was the first mailbox that the Fischel family had when they lived out on the Frost Place before they moved to Portland in 1925.
And what are you calling the Frost Place? What is the
Out-
Frost Place?
Well, out the Frost Corners, out in that big house.
Okay.
And then they had it over here to the brick house. Then we took it down, they took it down on Grant Street. Then from Grant Street, we took it up to Oakwood, and we had it on a post up there. Then we took it down on Riverside Drive, and we had it down there for our mailbox. And then when we come up here, we brought it up here. And it's been outside of that door ever since we lived here.
So
That's how people find us and know where we are.
Of course. Because they recognize the box, don't they? Don't they? Old
Yeah.
friends?
Yeah, yeah. Well, they recognize the name, you see.
Fern, before we conclude this interview, do you have any other comments that you'd like to make?
I don't know, ask me and then I'll tell you.
All right. I think your concluding statement is extremely revealing. In many years, the wonderful changes that you've seen happen in your life, and so that certainly says a lot to many of us who are not quite 90 years old. I'd like to say that I am Marge Smith, representing the Historical Society, and our Portland Area Historical Society is interested in recording the stories of people of this area, and we have an archive, if it can be called that, a collection at the Portland Library. Thank you very much for helping that effort. I'd also like for the viewing audience to know that Bob Gearman, Ionia County historian, writer, conservationist, has been responsible for the camera work and the arrangements for this interview. Good morning and thank you.